A very warm good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 7th in our series on ushering in the ecological revolution in our Naturenomics dialogue series. We began with the first session of the Naturenomics digital dialogue series on the 5th of June, and a week of conversations with different personalities over this past 1 week have helped us curate different understandings, some of which includes of rethinking the core of economics or rethinking local consumption, enhancing the role of technology in conservation, or even creating robust livelihood opportunities for rural people. So yes, different perspectives, different angles, but all directed and focused towards one goal of creating a rural future, which will pave the way for a naturenomic civilization. In our previous session, that was yesterday, our panelists had discussed how we can reintegrate people, ecology, and economy by better integrating ecological indicators and indigenous perspectives into growth. Our session today on redefining rural futures, building local natural capital economies, builds on this to explore how investing in and building natural capital to strengthen and creating green local economies that are self-reliant and self-sufficient can enhance rural and forest-fringe communities' resilience for rural futures. We are truly honored to have eminent personalities with us today. We have Dr. Anish Andheria, Rita Banerjee, Pradeep Banerjee, and Saurav Malhotra, who will share with us their insights on this subject. I also sincerely thank all the attendees for joining in and showing in your interest for the session. We request all of you to put in your questions for our panelists in the Zoom Q&A box, which you see now on your screen. We are also streamed right now live on our Facebook. If you have questions over there as well, just put it in the comment section and one of our team members will bring in the question. Yep. So moving ahead, I would like to introduce the moderator for today's panel, Dr. Anish Andheria. Dr. Anish Andheria is the president and CEO of the Wildlife Conservation Trust, a not-for-profit working in and around 160 national parks and sanctuaries in 23 states of India. He is a member of several government committees, including the National Tiger Conservation Authority, State Board of Wildlife of Maharashtra, the Executive Committee of the Gujarat State Lion Conservation Society, and the Executive Committee of the Village Social Transformation Program of Maharashtra. He has been awarded in the prestigious Carl Zeiss Conservation Award in 2008 and the UAA Institute of Chemical Technology Distinguished Alumnus Award 2017. He is a large carnivore biologist with immense knowledge on a predator-prey relationships and has contributed to several carnivore conservation projects across India. He has also co-authored 2 books on wildlife. Welcome, Anish, and I welcome all our other panelists as well. And over to you, Anish.
Thank you, Karishma. Thank you, Balipada. Thank you for having me. And I'm very happy that I have Pradeep, Saurav, and Rita on this panel, all accomplished people who have served whatever they do, whatever their professions are, but simultaneously also looked at serving the environment. And and all of them have used different tools and different strengths, and that is what it's what is going to make this panel discussion very interesting. 3 different perspectives and 3 solutions for the same issues. The way I want to conduct this session is simple. I will first go to Pradeep, then to Rita, and then to Saurav. I will pose a few questions to each panelist, and so after having around 10 to 12 minutes with Pradeep, I will move to Rita and then to Saurav. But before we start, I just want to draw your attention to the kind of situations that the planet and this country is facing. Thanks to the pandemic, we now know the importance of rural India. Cities have become virtually inhospitable. The difference between the rich and the poor has never been so starkly visible. Millions of people were stranded homeless. They had to walk hundreds and thousands of kilometers to reach. People started showing hostility towards other human beings. So a lot of our weaknesses came out. And if you talk to any psychologists, you would know that this is not surprising. When people are under stress, they become more aggressive or they become extremely quiet. A lot of people will go through huge amount of depression. And when people are under stressful situation, it can bring out the worst in them. So yes, the pandemic is an unpleasant thing for not only India uh, and the world, but also the poor or the doubly marginalized people on earth. But why am I talking about pandemic here? We are talking about rural future, and then why should I keep bringing the environment in it? The fact is that pandemic and the problems because of pandemic are very acute, but they are very similar to what we will face with climate change in the future. Climate change is a chronic issue. It is because of what we have done to this planet over the last 250 years. A lot of the impact because of the change in temperature, change in weather regime, change in climatic conditions, change in water, that is seawater temperatures. We are already seeing a spate of natural disasters, cyclones, hurricanes, forest fires. So nobody needs to be, nobody needs any confirmation that climate change is here to stay. Pandemic, on the other hand, is a severe threat to humanity and to other life forms, but in a shorter span. So if we can learn from this pandemic, we will be able to fight climate change in a much better way. So this is actually a net practice that we human beings have got an opportunity for. And I feel that thanks to these webinars, thanks to all these programs where people who have lived their life trying to fight the battle for the environment and therefore for human beings, to actually go out there and be heard. So I will be very happy if you can share the links of these webinars with as many friends and families that you have. Because all the effort that people like Pradeep, Rita, and Saurav have put in need to reach far and wide. So Pradeep, as you will know, will talk about his perspective will be from the business side of it. Rita will talk about the creative part of human beings and how one can utilize that to fight the grave battles of the environment. And Saurav works on the grassroots, well educated, but working deep in the remotest parts of Northeast to see how rural people can participate in improving their local environment. So without further ado, I would uh, ask my first set of questions to Pradeep. And before he answers my first question, I would ask him to introduce himself. And I'm sure the viewers will want to know because all our perspectives are based on what we have learned in our past and what we do in the present. And so it's very interesting. And please do share in relative detail about what you do. So Pradeep, um, with this background, what framework do you have in your mind for defining a rural future? Because we are talking about rural future. The difference between the city and the dividing line between the cities and the rural spaces are slowly degenerating. So what framework do you think that the industry should follow to define rural future? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Anish. A very quick check. Am I audible at the other end? Are you able to hear me clearly? Excellent. Now, first of all, I must thank Vallipara Foundation for bringing this subject to a discussion on a forum like this, because indeed, regardless of what Rita, Saurav, Pradeep speak, this is something which is very intimately tied up with with us very personally, for me, for my kids, and hopefully the generations ahead. So if we begin to talk redefining rural future, building local capital, in whichever way you term it, it is about our collective future as a species, as human beings. And I have got a very simple framework which begins to come when we see what is happening around us. Just to spend a minute on what you talked about COVID, I think of the pandemic, it is absolutely clear. The linkages will become clearer as we move ahead. But the fact that the health of the planet and human health are linked in a manner which is uh, very intimate, it brings to, there was nowhere a better time than this to understand that. And I'm sure a lot of insights which will come regarding not only the disease, but the way we kind of shape our life, and the new normal would be so different than what we are used to. If I just step back and begin to give you an outline of the framework, Anish, which is there in my mind, and go back to almost the industrial revolution and talk about how things have moved from industrial revolution 1.0 to 4.0 and so on, and all the discontinuities which have come in. There is no denying the fact that that model has served us well. Our average quality of life has improved, our health has improved, the average ages today are much better. And clearly, we enjoy a quality of life which is significantly superior to what our predecessors had in a comparative sense. But it is also very clear that what we are doing today, the data is stating us that there is a second discontinuity coming in, and our current lifestyle, which is consuming resources, and I think you use the word very nicely in your decks, which is about the extractive economy, which is taking out resources at a rate which will require 2.5 or 3 planets, depending on which data you talk about. It is completely, we are borrowing from the future to live our current lifestyle, and that ain't going to work. So that is the second point for me, that the point for discontinuity has come in. The third thing which I say, the economic model looking ahead clearly has to bring in some dimension which was not there earlier. And to me, I have been fortunate enough, and I have worked with a company which is Unilever for a very long time, and we have almost grown up, and I have almost grown up and seen how that fourth dimension, as I call it, going from 3G to 4G. And why do I describe that 3G and the 4G model? Is conventional. All the conventional business theories are built around essentially competitive growth, essentially sustainable growth, and essentially profitable growth. And I think and these are the three dimensions of growth we have almost catered to. Very, very focus, take care of your stakeholders, your employees, your shareholders, and the world will look after itself. But very clearly, the fourth dimension of responsible growth is coming in. And some of the companies which are evolved, they have seen it. And I have been fortunate enough to live and grow and learn my trade in an environment which was sensitive to this. And it is amply clear that the 4G model of growth, which is responsible, which is sustainable, which is profitable, but also creates economic value along with social value. And therefore, and there are measures of this which you can get in our, and people are beginning to invest their ethical equity funds, their ethical investments are beginning to happen with a very clear understanding that if you invest with the 4G model of growth, you will have superior business performance. And it is not about charity, it is not about philanthropy, it's not about a good thing to do. It is really the business imperative, and there's a very sound business case for responsible growth. And I think the current pandemic proves it amply. And if you just see some of the mega trends which are shaping this, call it the rapid urbanization, call it the huge technology advancement, call it the population explosion, call it the lack of trust in many of the government institutions, or lack of trust in the big businesses, all bring you to a sweet spot that unless we take on board the responsible element of the social dimensions, we will not grow anymore. The fourth point which comes to my mind is about the last point, really, that I see it not as a Eastern Himalayan issue. I don't see it as a fringe economics, fringe area issue. I do not see this as a rural versus urban issue. I think this is the way we want to model our future. And therefore, in fact, I would almost say that we probably will do injustice to a whole lot of people we choose to define rural, or we choose to define fringe populations and almost straitjacket them into an area so that the rules which they will live by would be very different. No, because the world is getting connected. Whether we like it or not, the world is connected. The aspiration which my children have and the aspiration which people living in the hinterland have, they are not million miles away. It's just that the access to that is limited. And I think people are beginning to realize that if you just see the evolution of the framework, the global UN Sustainable Development Goals, the goals which are coming, it talks about people, it talks about planet, and it talks about prosperity. And I think this is universal. It is as applicable in urban areas, as applicable in rural areas, is applicable in D markets, is applicable in emerging markets, it's applicable everywhere. The local expression of that may be different. And India, with all its kind of issues, I think has done some remarkable work. And I don't want to become a spokesman for that. But if you take a lot of things which have happened in terms of empowerment, in terms of inclusion, in terms of getting access to technology, clean fuel. Today, it is a matter of pride as an Indian that we are leading edge in renewable energy in terms of solar energy and so on. So the whole Indian kind of efforts in this are completely in sync with what the UN development goals are. And we need to let that kind of be a part of that movement. And then comes the corporates, then comes the economic engine. And again, I think it's not about large businesses or small businesses. This is the economic infrastructure of the country, which will have the large companies, the medium sector, the small sectors, because this is the ecosystem which feeds on each other. And they need to get into a very clear framework which says that we will create economic value and social value, and that is how the rules will be framed. And I give you an example of Unilever, which I am used to, and they took some very simple three big goals they will do in the next 10 years. And they went public with this. So I am not saying any thing which is confidential. You are more than welcome to go to the Unilever website and have a look. But the fact is, they said in the area of health and hygiene, we will do specific things. In the area of our emissions, we will do a set of things. And in the area of livelihood, we'll do a set. They had very clear 9 pillars, open to scrutiny, and they hold themselves accountable. And I think this is the reason why this is the model. This is the model which I think is not perfect. We don't have all the answers. But to say that we will evolve a model in which the ambition for growth is not diminished, but will grow in a manner which will decouple the impact we have of that growth on the planet. If you were to read reports, if you read Ellen MacArthur's report on circularity, it will tell you in a few years' time, you may have more plastic in the water than fish. And the debate can go on in many of this area. I will take a pause here because I'm conscious that I'll probably be reaching the 10 minutes which you gave me. And if time permits, I'll come back. But essentially, health and hygiene, emissions and livelihoods. Below this, there would be a number of work streams which we'll work on. And I would almost argue, and I can focus on 2 of them, which is, I think, of particular importance to the region we are talking about, which is about sustainable agriculture. And I want to pick up an issue on plastics if time permits, because it is quite an emotive subject now. And it is not right for us not to talk about it. But the fact is, and there are many such things. But I would start with sustainable agriculture and how it really means. But I'll come back to that, Anish, because I think let's go around once. And if we have time, we talk about that.
Thank you, Pradeep. Many important points that you raised. But I think there is time for you to mention if there is any work that HUL is doing, that is Unilever is doing, which can explain what you're saying in a much more crystal clear manner, so that people who are listening understand that how these ideas are taking shape in the field. It's not easy, but if you can use, say, about a minute to explain, it will be fantastic.
So let us take these 2 areas which I talked about. What we said is, take emissions. That we will double our business, and without any shame, because if there is no economic activity, we will not have the resources to invest behind this. But we'll double our business without having any impact of our growth on the planet. So what it really means that we will halve the impact which we have in terms of emission, in terms of the amount of energy we use, in terms of the amount of water you use, in terms of the kind of waste which you generate, and in terms of, so these are the 3 things. And we have been meticulously measuring this for the last. And guess what? If you get into a place which is using less resources, it is a profitable thing to do, because if you use less, you are by definition saving resources. By definition, you're becoming more profitable. And it is not rocket science that all of these have actually flowed down to the bottom line. And I have been a part of that movement, so I say that with a lot of pride, that there is a sound business case for sustainability. One of the commitments which was made that whatever material which we source, which has got agricultural background, agricultural source, be it paper, be it tea, be it palm oil, be it vanilla, the whole lot, they would be coming from regions which have certified sustainable agricultural practices. Now, in some areas, we have been instrumental in shaping that. For example, we are one of the largest users of palm oil. So the entire roundtable on the sustainable palm oil production, we, along with civil society, along with activists, along with people who know the subject, came to a set of framework as to what would that be. So that we are praying and we are using palm, which is from sustainable sources, 100% of that. We said we will, by 2020, we will do, end of 2020, we'll do 100%. I think we already reached a number of around 70. And very transparently, we say where we have done well and where we still. Tea, we are the largest tea maker in the planet today, on the world. And roughly, and the large part of the tea which we source is coming from certified sustainable practices. Now, why is this important? It is important because there is a whole large number of 450 million is the estimate that we have got smallholder farmers in the whose fortunes depend on these practices. So if you are able to give them practices which increase their income, which increase their yield, which increases their access to education, which makes sure there are no undesirable practices in terms of employment come in, and we associate ourselves with those kind of people who are doing that preferentially. And if that movement takes board, then very clearly over a period of one generation or maybe even sooner, we will have each and every tea plantation worker, each and every smallholder palm plantation leading a quality of life which is significantly superior to what it does today. And believe me, we are seeing the results, and it is so heartening to see that happening in the heartland. So
yes.
Let me stop here.
Okay, so,
and I'll come back if there's some time and we talk some more.
So basically, in summary, you have, if it's about economic capital, not without taking into consideration both the natural and the social capital. These three have to work hand in hand for sustainability. Sustainability is a very nice sounding word, but implementing on the ground is not easy at all. Now I will want to bring in Rita, who is a dear friend as well, and somebody who is a pied piper in my mind, strengthening the voice of a lot of young people living in the Northeast currently, but I'm sure if she has more time, she'll be a pied piper for a lot of youth across the country. So Rita, welcome. Pradeep skipped his own introduction, but I want you to introduce yourself before you start. We will allow Pradeep to introduce himself as well later, but my question to you is, how do you look at building natural capital economies, or how do you define natural capital economies from your perspective? But before that, your introduction, please. You are on mute.
Thank you, Anish, and it's great to be on this platform. Balipara, thanks for getting us all together. Well, my name is Rita, and I founded something called the Green Hub Project, which is based in the northeast of India right now. And it's a fellowship for youth from across the northeast to engage with conservation by using the visual medium. And before that, I was doing a lot of filmmaking. Yeah, so that's my introduction. When we, I think, Anish, when you talk about rural futures and we talk about natural capitals, I think a large set of people who are working with rural development, who are working with conservation and livelihood, who are working with wildlife, I think already are working in that direction, and they understand the significance of that. I think the COVID-19, what it has done is it's really brought it out. And I think now the challenge is that how do we really scale up our work? So in my mind right now, if we look at the youth, youth are our biggest asset, and I look at them as the natural capital. When you talk about bringing change on the ground, how do you really make that, transform that mind, or how do you really understand the value of natural capital? It's not just a word, but how do you really work on the ground? So I really look at youth as our biggest asset. And if you look at India, I mean, 65% of our population is below the age of 35. So So that's how I would define rural futures, and that's how I would define natural capital.
So I can see that you are from a filmmaking background, and now you are trying to transform youth, or not really transform youth, uh, be the driver of change. They already know what they need. So have you used the existing knowledge on filmmaking, and this of it basically to lead people to understand first of all their surroundings and then to take some action? What was the reason behind video and all that?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with my background as an environment filmmaker, and I think I've spent more than I started way back in '91, so it's been more than 25 years of making films. And the most beautiful part of it was that I've traveled across India to remote areas, to wildlife pockets, to rural areas, and interacted with, I think, incredible people who are working against all odds to bring in livelihood. And it's not new. I think it's been happening for years. So I think for me, the entire understanding of India, or understanding of conservation, environment, livelihood has actually come from the medium of making films. And at the same time, I've seen video as a very strong tool of conservation action. Whether you look at the whale shark film, which brought in the Wildlife Protection Act for the whale shark, whether you see the Amur falcon clip, and there are so many more examples where video actually has played a role in conservation action. So I think it's been a combination of both. So my whole idea was that how can we use video to engage the youth in understanding the forest and the rivers? It's a fantastic medium. Like, you take the video and you look at the bird and you see a close up of the bird. It's very different from just seeing a bird from a distance. And you see a visual of your forest, which you have shot yourself, and you see a whole mist going across it. That whole love for nature, love for your thing, the pride which you feel of your biodiversity, the video is a fantastic tool for that. So I think that is the reason we use video, and that is the reason we created the fellowship. So the video is more like a tool to transform minds, to make them fall in love with nature. And so you end up protecting it.
How many, first of all, people may love to know how many youngsters have actually passed through your training program. So what is the alumni like, and can you share a few stories which has really brought about change on the ground?
Yeah. So what I can do, Anish, is show a few slides to explain really. We are actually not very old. We are 5 years old. Every year we take 20 fellows. And the focus of choosing the fellows is really that they belong to indigenous communities who belong to this region. Our target group is fellows from remote areas. Many of them are part of the forest patrolling staff. Many of them haven't even touched a camera. And it's a mix. Some of them are from urban centers also. So I'll just share a few slides to give an idea of what is happening. This is what it looks like now across the Northeast. Over the last 5 years, we have about 88 fellows, and representing all the states. From last year, even Tripura joined this thing. So a total of 88 fellows, including this batch. So out of these 88 fellows, almost 90% of them are still engaged in some form or the other with conservation action, either through making films or by working directly with the community. And there's been a change of thought about, there's some confidence that, okay, there is a future in conservation and you can actually think of a livelihood through that. So that is what I meant by rural future. So this is one man. He was in fact from our first batch. He's from an area called Changlang. The village is called Changlangshu in Mon district. So before coming to Green Hub, even one way, if you hear him talk, he was hunting. He just came to learn video actually. And he's a fantastic talent. If you see his film, he shoots beautifully, edits beautifully. But after the whole fellowship, his understanding of conservation deepened. And in 2018, he started some biodiversity management committee in his village. It started with 7 members. These were the original 7. Now it's a 23-member team. He's convinced the village council to recognize it. And apart from doing many other things, they've selected this area. What has happened is there's a lot of deforestation because of June. There's no other external factor here. It's primarily June. They're facing a lot of water crisis, and it borders Myanmar. They're beautiful forest around the corner. So what he's done now is selected a piece of land between 2 small forest patches which is left. And now they're trying, through community participation, trying to restore it. So they developed a nursery and they've started plantation. And our idea is to link as many people to one May so that it becomes a learning center. It's not just a community thing, but there's a research angle to it. We do video documentation to have a multiplier effect. So this is one of our pilot sites. We call it the Forest Project site. This is Surly Born. She's from Karbi Anglong. You can see her, in front of the tree, really proud to see the girth of the tree. She's also been working with her community. Rubber plantations is a big problem in our area. She's recently formed something called Youth for Nature Dongamukam, and she's forming a collective. They're talking about community-based ecotourism. They're talking about sustainable agriculture and things like that. And they use various methods like, community screenings. This is a glimpse of the river which is there, which is still untouched. And these are the rubber plantations which are coming up. So similarly, there are many more fellows. This is Mordecai from Taminglang, which is quite a remote district in Manipur. And very few people from there. So he's started something from Taminglang for conservation. He also works with Corbett Foundation. And now we are talking to all of them about conservation, education, and things like that. So I would like end the slide here, but there's a whole lot of youth who are developing a network and making a difference on the ground. And sometimes they even break patterns for us by engaging with communities we may think are inaccessible. So this is a militant group, but he went and had a session with these guys. So. So yeah, and this is the way they use video to engage with the community also. So they also teach us a lot about how you can use video with the community.
Thanks.
So that's what's happening, Anish. Yeah.
So while you were speaking about all these things, and I mean, Northeast is very dear to everybody's heart here in India. It's one of the greenest patches, but people know, if you have been following news and all the information that's there on the social media, that Northeast India is the greenest part of India, and that is why it's also being targeted currently for huge developmental projects. And there are several things, including big dams coming on rivers, multiple dams coming on the same river, mining, coal mining right next to the tiger reserve or elephant reserve. Then you have another oil spill that is happening very close to a national park. So while it is very green, we know that there is huge amount of threat. So how do you think that what you're doing, and because you started 5 years ago and you already have about 88 fellows, how do you think all those people will actually, it will amalgamate into a movement which will, because we cannot conserve Northeast by being somewhere far away. It has to be done by people living in Northeast. So how do you plan to do it? You have only 1 minute for this.
So Anish, the main thing is that when I was talking about transforming minds, as an organization, we can do just that much. But if you see the last 2 months with the Dibang Valley, with the Dehing Patkai, with other parts of India, what has been the most heartening is the way the youth have taken it forward. You see the social media and it's full of hashtag Dibang Valley, hashtag Dehing Patkai, even my Mulayam and other parts of India. So there is a change in mindsets, not just the greener fellows, but I think there's a sense of urgency about the environment amongst the youth. And I think despite all these forces which are going on, hitting at the environment, and one of the most pristine areas, I mean, Dibang Valley is one of the most beautiful areas, Dehing is one of the most beautiful patches, but it's amazing the way the voices have risen. So I think they know they realize the urgency of it. And I think because of that, many of the people have woken up and are now speaking about it. So I think it's not just the youth, but it has to be a collective collaborations between NGOs, civil society, researchers, scientists. I think the collective action is what will, I think, be the future. Whether, and including businesses. I think what Pradeep was saying was a very fantastic thing. Actually, the intensity of engagement, I think, between businesses and NGOs and civil society has to be at a much deeper level. I think it has to go beyond just everybody working in silos, but really, really making a difference.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think people can keep listening to you guys for hours on end. But now I'll come to Ghar Ka Murga. This man works with Balipada and don't go by his age. He has much more wisdom than those black hair that he has on his head. So first is your intro, and then obviously, why do you do what you do, and what sense do you see in a person who could probably work anywhere from California to London to come and actually work in your own backyard with communities? What is that? What is it that motivates you, and what is your plan for the future, for rural future?
Thank you, Anish. Thanks, Pradeep and Rita. I think a lot that I have to say will weave in many of the points that you've covered. So just a quick intro. I've been with the Balipada Foundation for close to 4 years now and have co-founded and helped design the Rural Futures framework that we've been deliberating on this whole past week. And Rural Futures pretty much, and most of the work that we currently do on the ground is trying to figure out a framework through pilots on the ground for linking the restoration of habitats to socioeconomic mobility of our forest-fringe communities. And the reason why we do this, I've been involved with some conservation programs before my stint with the Balipada Foundation. And most of these conservation programs were not in India. And I think one big realization was that I was trying to protect biodiversity in areas which had already lost biodiversity, like 100 years ago, And so one big move was, I think, coming back. I was just actually planning on doing an internship with the Balipada Foundation, which has, which grew, and I just couldn't, leave it, and it's been fantastic. And I think the reason why I think the opportunity really is in rural, although I do kind of agree about the lack of a real divide between rural and urban based on what Pradeep was talking about. I think that rural is really where the focus has to be now, and not just because of COVID. So we've been trying to push rural futures now for the last 4 years at least. And I think that currently, as Rita mentioned, everything is just come out in a very beautiful but unfortunate light and time frame. And I think that the opportunity here really is that, so out of the 7 and growing billion people in the world, about 3.5 of those live in rural areas across the world. But about 97% of the wealth of the world is located in the urban centers. That is the first problem. About 1.6 billion people depend directly on forests for their livelihoods. This is not a problem. 5.4 billion people depend indirectly on the forest and rural areas for all their essentials like food, material to build houses, water, and technically also really the air that keeps them alive. So while the whole world really, including people who don't live in rural areas, are dependent on rural areas and forests, why is it that all the wealth accumulates in these so-called urban pockets? And why is it that all the wealth is accumulating with the so-called wealth aggregators, mostly lying in these urban pockets? I think that the case here is not just conservation of biodiversity, which many of us are closely involved with, but also a larger case of equity and social justice. And the opportunity that we've been trying to explore for 3 years and pushing at this point in time is really to try and bring this wealth back to where it belongs. And the reason why I'm saying back to where it belongs is because much before agriculture, which really transformed the world maybe 7,000 years ago, forests, including the great Amazon rainforest, were all really mixed crop, large farms. So forests have been the first source of food, and there are many scientific reports which actually say that humans have helped enhance the biodiversity of rainforests such as the Amazon, because humans were actively involved in foraging and seed dispersal 7,000 years ago before agriculture. So the opportunity here that we're trying to push through the Rural Futures framework is trying to get rural communities, forest communities. I'm not going to get into the legalities of forest communities at this point in time, but we can have a whole other debate on that. But getting forest communities behind the full value chain of rewilding or of the restoration of habitats, from seeds to nurseries to reforestation, and along with this, creating added livelihood incentives to really optimize the value of land. I think everything here just comes back to soil, what you do with land, and how healthy your land is. And through some initial interventions with agroforestry and stuff, we have seen an increase in land output in terms of the cash that you get per hectare, from about 3 lakhs per year per hectare to say close to 10 lakhs per year per hectare. We haven't done nutrient analysis, but I'm sure that organic agroforestry has high benefit. Previous scientific data has actually proven this. So through Rural Futures, we drive community-led programs for habitat restoration and mixed agroforestry in buffer areas and in homestead agricultural areas to create a first level of food security, to create an initial level of income security, which also helps in enhancing the natural capital pool of the area. And I think that this natural capital pool can be used to create social assets, to create social delivery assets, and improving healthcare, education, many of the things that Pradeep mentioned. And I think the one point here, I think quite interestingly, Pradeep, you mentioned that aspirations between rural and urban are not very different, but the access to say things like education are different. So I think what enhancing natural capital and what creating models for natural capital liquidation will do is it will increase social mobility and decrease inequalities in opportunity over the next few years. I think the bottom line here really is that we need to really look at this complex web of forest, wildlife, and humans as one interconnected and symbiotic mesh rather than disjointed and parasitic, but actually feeding into each other and helping everything else grow.
So, Saurabh, so if you are part of a community living in, say, Arunachal Pradesh, and if you are a negotiator, that the community has decided that you will go and convince Unilever to come and set up something out there so that it becomes a circular economy, and then so the cash flow can remain within the community. How would you be able to convince somebody like Pradeep? I don't think you need convincing Pradeep. He will run straight away. But if it is a company that you go to, what would you do? Because I think the important thing is how are big businesses going to start looking at the rural capital as an important thing without degenerating it. So mostly we have, over the last 250, 300, 400 years, we have lived on a principle of extractionism. But how can we do businesses in the future so that while maintaining the sanctity of the environment, we are able to have some cash in hand for people to meet their aspirations?
Sure, thanks. So I think for this, I'm going to talk a bit about civilization, but I'm going to start off with actually Pradeep's equation of the fact that responsible business actually gives you more money and gives you far greater profits than the non-responsible kind of business. So looking at agriculture, for example, and I know that a lot of Pradeep's interests lie in tea and palm oil and the greater agricultural sector associated, I think a clear business then would be you've got land that is owned by the communities, which is still default in many parts of Arunachal, but not everywhere else. But I think primarily localization in a way that companies, for example, HUL, anything else, companies do not own assets in these areas. Companies allow local people to own assets, in fact, promote local ownership of assets in say areas like Assam, where a lot of the land still belongs to the government and therefore is mismanaged. So I think promoting local ownership and using mixed models for say agriculture, because currently we've been talking about agriculture, I think using mixed models where you integrate tea with sustainable crops, you can integrate tea with fruits, you can integrate tea with vegetables, and some very, very high value cash crops like moringa, stuff that we've tried in ground. And in fact, you can also integrate tea with mushroom, and that actually really, really helps in tea growth. So I think with models like that, not just us, but many, many other experts have been able to prove on the ground that the yield per hectare is far greater than of a monoculture plantation. The money that you get per hectare because of this yield is therefore far greater than a monoculture plantation. But also, if you actually got to the bottom of it and analyze, say, the nutrient content, for example, protein that you have in like a chana seed, that'll be about 40% greater if it comes from an organic by default agroforestry like mixed plantation. So I think that the business case here is great because there's no losses. There's no losses. It is sustainable because it is community owned, and it is better for the world. It is better for local economy. It is better for the consumers. The one issue here is that where is this food going to go, right? So I think, are we talking about growing food in Arunachal and taking it to the US? Or are we talking about growing food in Arunachal for Arunachal? And maybe certain excesses are coming into Assam. So I think that is where the big debate lies. So I think I'm going to just briefly talk about localization, I think, and how experts like Pradeep in this case, I think, have definitely thought about it and have great views. So really, I mean, I think localization is nothing but sort of rescaling the economy back to a more social and a more human level. I know that at many times localization gets mixed up with isolation, but localization does not mean isolation at all. It really, I think, talks about trying to eliminate trade. Communities can still export their surpluses, but only after local needs are met, and they can definitely import goods that cannot be produced locally. And I think that this kind of localization really allows local, regional, but even national increase in reliance to replace the kind of dependence that we have now on distant and sometimes very unaccountable corporations. I think the current situation of COVID-19 has really highlighted the benefits of local economies as well, and the fact that they are resilient to large-scale disruptions in supply chain, resilient to large-scale changes in demand, which are mostly consumer-centric and trend-centric and not really need-based, and the fact that a localized economy, for example, in Arunachal, like you mentioned, Anish, would be sort of created by the people and for the people who live there. The excesses could be taken off by say companies and processed and then exported. But I think having businesses in certain areas just to extract the fertility of the soil is not going to be even profitable in the long run. So I think that a lot of these extractionist economies have been profitable just because of the way global laws have been built and the global taxes have been subsidized and the way subsidies have been dealt with. So I think really what I'm talking about here is a combination of like a bottom up grassroots initiative for change and a top down change of policy. And I think areas where I think all of us can get together, Pradeep, Anish, and Rita, and us, is actually, we need to be able to talk at the policy level to try and shift taxes and subsidies back to local and sustainable businesses.
So let me go back to Pradeep on this. Pradeep, now that Saurav has come and has tried to sell you a beautiful idea, do you think with your corporate hat, does it make sense for a corporation? Because people want to continue to grow as an industry. So is it possible to have a business which is confined within a state or within a small community or a rural setup and still grow? Is it possible?
Yeah.
Is that a challenge or is it possible?
Look, Anish, let me give you my perspective. And to begin with, your question was try to sell it to Pradeep. You will not have to sell it to me, Saurabh, at all. I'm sold. I'll tell you why I'm sold. But I've got a slightly different point of view, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But I'm sold with with the idea which you have, the concept which you have, that we need to empower the smallholder farmer, the tea plantation guy, the guy who is doing raising the various crops, because in that, and integrate him into the value chain, so that the large part of the value chain is going to the guy who is actually producing. Today, that is not the case, by the way. Today, that is not the case. Whether you take tea, you take palm, you take many other agricultural produce, the farmer who's producing it, he is not possibly getting the best deal, not only for what he is doing, but for a whole range of other things in terms of the inputs which he needs, in terms of seeds, in terms of pesticides, in terms of basic practice. So we need to get, see, the smallholder is the steward of the land, and therefore he must get full control. He must be integrated in the value chain so that he can do what is right, because only he is the guy. We have not even talked about diversity today. He is the guy who can make sure that we do the sensible things. You talked about multi-cropping, mushrooms and things. I will take that aside. But fundamentally, if your output from 1 hectare of land goes up dramatically, and the small-scale farmer gets a larger share of that increased output, it empowers him to get a whole lot of things which is missing today in terms of education, medicine, health, and the take it. And our job should be to make sure that happens. Now, there are many ways you could do that. And one of the models which I see works quite well, and I go back to Rita, what you talked about partnerships. It will be one of the key skills for the coming generation or coming few years, certainly would be partnership, ability to work in partnership with NGOs, and we have done a huge amount of learning in that area. So we have, going back to Saurabh, so how do you make sure the larger part of the value chain is going to the smallholder farmer? You have to have at least some principles. So we have come up with maybe 8 or 10 or 12, and we try to get that. And these fundamental principles we are trying to incorporate into our almost the buying process. And what we are saying is we will go to those people who have this, and we'll preferentially not go to those people who don't have this. And with a fond hope that we can be a part of a movement which over a period of time will lead to a situation where large organizations choose to have and create the market, create the demand for products like this. For example, we would look at terms of employment. For example, we will see if he's got equal opportunities on his side. We will see whether he's just giving minimum wages or he's got what we call fair wages, where access to food, access to sanitation, access to, is he age appropriate? Does he have a child labor on? Is he doing some exploitation? There's a whole lot of, there are some principles which you can see. But the sad thing is today it is happening. And unless we put down rules that this is no more okay in the coming, in future, things will not change. And that change can only happen when we create a marketplace for that. And I think the corporations can step in to create the marketplace and slowly over a period of time, create that freedom or that space for these kind of. I will give you 2 examples. We worked with a tomato farmer in Maharashtra near Nasik. And without getting into names, today she is exporting to the world based on the yields which have gone up, based on sustainable practices, based on very simple inputs which you could work with her. And it is absolutely heartening to see the change in the quality of life where what has happened in that patch of Nasik. So it is doable. I can give you examples in tea and palm. But the fact is, it has to be a joined up contract in which it is not either or, it is both. And I think this spirit we must get into. So, and I'll stop there. I'm looking at the Anisha,
yes,
and your anxiety on your face.
No, exactly. I just was indicating to Rita that I'm coming to her because she wanted to make a point. That's all.
Okay, and I've still not introduced myself, but that is for another time because important is we get our views too.
Yes, Rita.
I just wanted to make one point because I think we are always talking about natural resources as capital, as monetizing it all the time. In this pandemic is shown that the role I think people at the grassroots, the civil society has been huge vis-a-vis the development model which we follow. And especially talking about oil palm, I would like to understand it a bit more because I have seen it in Northeast, prime forest areas across Dampa forest are cleared for oil palm. I don't see it as a great business model. Arunachal, some areas are being marked out. You will never be able to replace the rainforest or the tropical forest or the kind of forests which are there. And at the same time, it's not just the earning from the oil palm, it doesn't end there. It does impact the water, which is connected to the forest. So I think there has to be a deeper thinking about how this engagement with, I think it's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but this intention and the thinking has to be deeper and has to be, I think, intentioned in the right direction, where you're not always thinking of profits at the end. Profits can be counted at multiple levels. And in this side where Saurav was talking about small farming, these are the guys through this lockdown have not needed relief at all. The people who are working in the cities, in corporations, the migrants, they're the ones who've had to go through this crisis. So I think there has to be a deeper thinking around this and an honest kind of debate around this, or dialogue, not debate, dialogue. Yeah.
No, Rita, I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, we probably are running out of time. The
No,
whole
it's okay.
subject of deforestation, the whole object, even, for example, no peat, making sure there is no destruction of the peatland. These are almost crop specific things. But the subject which you raise of land ownership, days of rights of plantation owners, of plantation workers, smallholder farmers, the access to finance which they have. At times they're paying abnormal sums of money just to get access to seeds and some of the basic inputs which they need. And this ecosystem is what, Rita, we need to change, because this is a systemic change which will take time, and there has to be commitment behind it. And I can tell you there are more than one organization that I know, large companies which are which don't need to be convinced. It's just that we just go ahead and do it. So I have worked for, as I said, for the company which is doing it for 10 years publicly, with metrics, with published, for scrutiny. And I'm sure this movement will only accelerate in times to come. So you are on a, you are talking to the converted, increasingly large number of converted people, Rita, let me tell you.
Okay, so thank you very much, folks, for having a, enlightening us with your experiences, and also having a discussion on very, very important topics about land, water, human rights. The palm oil issue is bigger than life, and it is destroying some of the most pristine forests across this planet. However, people also know that if palm oil plantations can be modified, which means if they all are moved to degraded land, which are lands that are completely devoid of trees right now, even in a country like Indonesia, then that will pretty much make sure that there's enough and more palm oil available for the business to go on. So it's just the trade-off between clearing of forest for palm oil, but there are ways in which both can happen hand in hand. So I think with this, I will want to take your leave. I have another webinar to go to, and it is starting in 2 minutes. But it was very, very nice to share this panel with you people. And I now hand over to Karishma, who will ask some questions that have been raised by people watching you people. Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you,
Thank you, Anish.
Thank you so much, Anish.
Thank you, Anish.
Thanks a lot, Anish.
Thanks,
Yeah.
thanks,
a lot.
Anish.
Okay, so I think we'll just begin with our questions. So the first question is for Mr. Pradeep Banerjee. If you can explain the sustainable palm oil plantation scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think in the beginning when I was talking about, we said 100% of our agricultural, all the material which we buy, which have agricultural base, would be from plantations which have sustainable practices. There are industry standards. For example, we've got roundtable RSPO, which is probably we were part of the founder members of RSPO. Without getting into details, which have got a whole range of things. And today, 100% of the palm which you are buying are coming from sustainable practices as determined by the industry standards today. Now, is that the case that everybody is doing so? Not to the best of my knowledge, but we certainly are committed to doing so. Now, what are the elements which get into sustainable palm? At this point of time, it will probably take, it's a complex area. I can get to the criteria which goes into declaring palm comes from sustainable practices, but it has got very clearly the land titles. It's got the practices which are there in terms of the way you pick the fruit bunch and so on. But the fact is, this is industry standards which are open to scrutiny. And as long as there are large people who are working to create the demand, often at some premium, are going to create the demand for such oils or such agricultural produce, this market will continue to grow. Why? Because the people who are in this business, they get a rate of return which is higher which allows them to plow back some of this into practices which are increasing the quality of life of the smallholder farm. I would invite you to visit our website, and a huge amount of detail you will get, not only for palm, but you will get for some of the other areas which we are committed to. It is there in public domain. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Our next question is, how do you define natural capital, and what is your expectation from the rural people and the policymakers to build natural capital and economy? Do you think the industrialization will be a major obstacle to conserve nature and natural assets? Probably Rita or Saurav can talk about it.
Maybe I will take this,
Sorry,
Rita, if that's all
yeah.
right. Yeah. Okay. So I think
Yeah.
simply natural capital is just the stock of everything that nature offers you, from air to water to everything, and it is from this natural capital that we derive things that we need for our existence. So it's food, water, shelter, everything else. That is natural capital. I think the question on trying to get a green economy in rural areas, I think that will probably or should happen as a default consequence of the stuff that we've seen over the last 2 months around the world. It has been, it is already actually happening, because if you look at urban economies are supplied by rural economies, right? So all the things that you need for an urban economy, for essential urban economy items like food, your soil, the stuff that you build your houses from, it all comes from rural areas anyway. I think the emphasis now has to be on enhancing the power given to rural farmers, the power given to rural small and medium enterprise holders, and the fact that it all really comes down to how we redistribute wealth. Where is all the money going? Who's making all the profits and why? So, which is why I think I will say that I think what is really important now is to look at not an isolated form of localization, but a really connected form of localization where we support the growth of new local economies, where we support local entrepreneurship and the aggregation of these entrepreneurs. And I think this can only be enhanced by having changes in policy, which will prevent or reduce subsidies, say, for fossil fuels, which will prevent and reduce subsidies for the things that the global or the bad global market is made up of. So we need to subsidize local economies and small farmers, as opposed to fossil fuel industries, which are resulting in, say, the things happening in Dehing Patkai and Dibru-Saikhowa and everywhere else. So everything is connected. Localization is the next step, and I think that changes in taxes and subsidies will be the only long-term solution to initiate this change. I'm sure that Rita wants to add some stuff there at the end.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Okay.
I think
yeah.
Can I just bring in one thing? Is that okay, Karishma? Do we have time for that?
Sure. Please go ahead.
Look,
Yeah.
I could not agree with Saurav more, because I think you make an important distinction. It is about, and the sooner we start talking about, not talking about this divide of rural versus urban, it will allow us to focus on the right things. For example, it will allow us to focus on skill, the availability of skills, the availability of infrastructure, the availability of communication, the right logistics. The moment we start focusing on these things, the landscape will continue to change and go to the place sort of where you want it to be. The current migration which we see after the pandemic broke, it brings home one basic point, that people have gone in search of better quality of life to places where it is available today. And the flip side of this is it's not available in their own kind of aspirations from where they've come from, and we need to change that in some shape or form. And it's a planning and a policy exercise, as much about a planning and a policy exercise as about the whole business. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So our next question came over on Facebook. So this question is related to the natural capital of Magri Bill. The wetland attracts birders and photographers from the world over, leading to the proliferation of resorts, homestays, and bird guides. The future of this important macroeconomy for villages surrounding is suddenly uncertain as the bird habitat has been destroyed. these poor villagers haven't benefited from the oil industry, as is evident in their standards of living. Rather, they have to pay with the loss of their properties and livelihoods, most connected to the contaminated wetlands. Can the panelists discuss how rural futures could perhaps elaborate a new approach to protect livelihoods and ensure the ecological rights of villagers in the context of what happened at Mangri? Yeah.
I think I can
Who would like to
just
take that?
I can just start off, and I think Saurav and Pradeep can add to it. I think the biggest challenge which I think is happening in India right now is the kind of clearances which are being given to what we have as our natural capital. And it's happening at a pace which is very difficult to fight until we actually manage to protect what we have. It's really difficult to plan anything else. Even if you look at the EIA, the if you look at what is being proposed, each and everything, I think all the people working with environment across India, everybody is now trying to put in their comments. And if you really go through it, each and every point there is moving towards destroying whatever forests we have. It's digging out new areas. Rights of people are going away. So I think before we can even move to talking about a rural future, I think it's really important right now to raise our voices against what is happening and really come up with, I think if these things are passed, I don't think we have a rural future, because it's happening at a large scale. It's happening in the Northeast, it's happening across India. And it's very important as citizens, if we really are serious about protecting the livelihood of these people, of the poor people, people who are living on the forest fringes, even people who are dependent on businesses, it's very important to actually save the areas which we have and not, give the kind of clearances which are happening. And I think all those links are there on social media. So one of the first things I think as citizens we need to do is go and put our comments on that, so that these EIA policy and all those things do not change for the benefit of a few and destruction of a larger thing. I think that is the first step. About the future, I don't know.
Yeah. Saurav or Mr. Banerjee, if you want to add to it.
Yeah, so I mean, I just actually like to re-emphasize here on the fact, I think, Rita, I completely agree with you. But then, I think the fact that these environmental clearances are happening is terrible. But I think the truth behind that is that there's still demand for oil and coal, right? So I mean, there's still global demand for oil and coal. And the fact that many countries, many of the largest users of oil and coal still in the world are talking about further subsidizing oil and coal right now. So that will by default lead to the opening up of new pockets, and unfortunately most of the oil and coal in the world is either found offshore or is found snugged away in the middle of all of our biodiversity.
But Saurav, you've seen the reports which have come out in when the study on Dibang is also there, and there's a lot of study about renewable energy becoming more accessible, becoming more cost effective. And in fact, a whole report has gone to the Ministry of Power, where there's a detailed study on the. So I think we also need to now not follow the old narrative and look at what are the options, especially after the pandemic, because there are a lot of studies which are showing that this is the only way forward. So we really need to change the narrative on that also and explore other options.
And I mean,
at least push for it.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that renewable energy is cheaper in the long run, cheaper and just makes more sense for your business and for your country. So I think, first of all, I think making fossil fuels much more expensive than they are now will automatically shift investments into renewables to begin with, and then that is what will pave the way. I mean, India's been talking about the Solar Alliance for a long time, but we do not really see that happen right now, do we? I'm sure Pradeep has a lot to add on this.
No, I can add a lot on the energy thing which you talked about. But and we have to see the reality. India is a large country. India is governed by a system of governance which at times appears to make things slow compared to some of the other countries which are there around us, for example. And I don't want to get into that debate on the political systems, but the fact is the increase in renewable energy in this country has been phenomenal. And it has been driven by pure economics. And that is what is today. Solar power is cheaper at many places than what the normal grid power is. Now, the fact that we have got power distribution companies, power generation companies, there's a whole lot of transmission losses, and there is a difficult kind of subject in which you determining rates become difficult. But if you were to take rupees per kilowatt hour produced through solar route versus conventional route, the result is much cheaper. And therefore, the rate of renewable energy is bound to keep on coming down as technology progresses. And India, we are blessed with huge abundance of wind and solar power. So I actually feel very optimistic. And then this whole issue of whole area of solar alliance, one world, one grid, we will one day, I'm sure we will get there. But even within the country, to get into one grid, I think we need to take a few steps from a legislation point of view. But it does not take away from the fact you go to Rajasthan, you go to the Uttar Pradesh of this world, go to the southern part, the people are putting real money on ground in power generation, which is purely from renewable sources. And that can only mean that the economic activity is done in a manner which is less detrimental to the planet. And therefore, that famous, we have not even talked about the 2-degree rise debate, because we can keep on talking till cows come home. But the fact is, that rate of increase of, let's say, warming will put everything in a very finite time span. We don't have to wait hundreds of years for that. That will be much more sooner. So getting to real action on renewable energy is so vital. And I think people have smelled the coffee, at least in this country, in terms of economically, that's the right thing to do. That's where my understanding is.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Mr. Banerjee. Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Saurav, and also thank you, Anish. I think it's been a very great session. And I think we have a lot more questions, but because of time constraint, we couldn't take it. But please be assured, whoever have put forward the questions, we will send you the answers for it with the help of our panelists. And with this, thank you once again to our panelists. And also, like, since the beginning, the first day of our session, it's been very interesting, it's been very insightful. Thank you to each one of you for being a part of it. We shall be back with the second series of the Naturenomics dialogues very soon, and take forward this platform and look at different important areas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Garishma.
Yeah.
Thank you.